Hello, my name is Liam Marchant. Today we're going to be looking at the idiomatic tendencies of the flute. Um, some specifications of the flute. It's a cylindrical aerophone, and up until 1850 it was considered a conical aerophone made of wood. And this is regarded as the Baroque flute, and was later adapted to a cylindrical designed to account for more versatility and dexterity that the flute offered. The addition of rotted keys allowed for alternate fingerings to be used other than the fork fingerings that are used on the Baroque flute. Um, Fork fingerings is when a tone hole is depressed other than the original or the primary tone hole. And so if you're composing for Baroque flute, you have to consider finger choreography or finger choreography, similar to how you would use finger choreography in writing for piano. The modern day flute is silver, silver-plated nickel, gold or gold-plated silver, very commonly gold-plated nickel. But the standard range of the flute is a C4 to a C6. I'm sorry, C7. It's a non-transposing instrument, meaning the pitch written is the pitch heard. The dynamic tendency of the flute is to start at a piano or pianissimo in the basement of the instrument and go up to a forte, fortissimo at the upper range. Because of this, and the most important thing to take away from this presentation is that if you're writing for flute, always write above the staff. Unless it's a solo or a small ensemble, or if it's, a concert band selection, it's like just flute and clarinet, or just flute and another quietly pitched instrument. Otherwise, it's not going to come through the ensemble at all. Another thing to note, extended range of the flute. Some flutes will have a longer foot joint that can reach a B3, so a B below that middle C. And like most woodwinds and brass instruments, the extended range or the top of the range really just comes down to the player. But the written range that I've provided gives kind of a basic outline of what the standard range of the instrument is. And most high schoolers or beginner collegiate players are going to be able to hit the notes within that range. Another thing to note is that the piccolo transposes an octave up from what the written range is of the regular concert flute. Another thing about the piccolo is that the low range of it is only going to descend to a D, so it won't go to that C4 below the staff, or I guess a C5 since it transposes up the octave. The alto flute is going to transpose to G and is the only instrument within the modern woodwind family that transposes to G. It has the same written range as the concert flute. The bass flute has the exact same written range as the concert flute, but transposes an octave below. One of the biggest things to note about flute playing in general is that there's no air resistance. So unlike any of the other woodwinds, there's no reed pushing up against the player's air. So the breath at which the player plays with isn't going to be able to extend for as long as, say, a clarinet player's will. More experienced flute players will be able to play for longer passages, but it's just important to know that it's a lot harder to play going than it is to play, just think of it like that. With registers, there are 3 octaves within the flute. The first 2 registers are going to have the exact same finger patterns, but the flautist is going to overblow or spin the air faster to create that higher octave partial. The third register, the third octave of the flute, still within the standard range of the flute, is the altissimo register, and we'll get into that a little bit later and talk about what that means to be in the altissimo register. But it just means that the air is being split a little bit differently, and some more complex finger patterns are or fingerings are used to create those. If you want to write successfully for any woodwind instrument, or really any instrument that you don't play, it's a really good idea to get familiar with fingering charts and the patterns that they have. So if we look at the left image, the patterns on the left column are the exact same pretty much as the right column. And if you didn't know that the player has to overblow or spin the air faster to create the higher partial, you wouldn't exactly know the sonic difference between those fingerings. But it's important to get familiar with these just to recognize what exactly is possible, and also that crossing those register breaks is going to be a little bit tricky for things like trills or tremolos. Additionally, the suppression of the D sharp touch piece is used for intonation discrepancies throughout the flute. So you might see on this E, F, F sharp, G, A flat, A sharp, we're always holding down that D sharp, and that's just to account for intonation discrepancies. So fingering patterns continued here. Like I said, get familiar with fingering charts for whatever instrument you are trying to write for. And let's talk a little bit about the instrument's altissimo register, because I already talked about the first two registers. But altissimo is Italian for very high, and the altissimo register on most other woodwinds is considered extended range of the instrument, while on the flute, it's considered within the normal range of the flute. And these pitches in the altissimo register are realized through a combination of overtones and irregularly split register locations. So what that means is on most woodwind instruments, and I think, in fact, on all woodwind instruments, there's some sort of register key that is opened to split the air and create that higher partial. So on the flute, we're opening register keys where they usually aren't opened, at least in the first two registers, to split that air. And with the player's spinning of the air faster, it creates higher overtones, higher partials on the flute. So some things to check out for a score study is definitely Prokoviv's Peter and the Wolf. The scene of the bird, I guess, is the greatest way to look at it. Although it's within the staff, it's at a point in the orchestration where there's minimal other instruments playing, and so the sound of the flute is able to carry. But you also notice that some of the points where the flute pops out the most is where it's above the staff. But the articulation patterns, as well as the grace note gestures, is highly indicative of flute playing, and is probably one of the best examples of a flute solo. Additionally, Claude Debussy's Syrinx here is a great example of flute playing in a very, it's solo flute, so it's a great example of what solo flute looks like and sounds like, obviously. Additionally, one of the greatest score studies to look at for flute in an ensemble is the Rite of Spring. And orchestrationally as well as compositionally, the Rite of Spring is a piece of music that really every composition major should be familiar with. But the use of the flute, specifically at this section, so we're at measure 37. This is in the Dance of the Augurs. This flute section, where it's significantly high and is percolating just on top of everything, really shows off the brilliance of the flute and how you can use it in an ensemble. So check out Prokoviv as well as Debussy and Stravinsky for some really great examples of flute writing. These were the sources that I used. Some of the resources on Dr. Leonard Garrison's website was really, really helpful. And one of the sources that you should check out if you want to get into multiphonic writing as well as like really extended modern technique of the flute is a book called The Other Flute by Robert Dick. It outlines just about every combination for modern flute multiphonics, as well as extended modern technique that a lot of composers are using these days. But in terms of writing for the flute, the biggest takeaway that you should have is always write above the staff. With exceptions, but always write above the staff. So thank you, and we'll see you guys around.